VCY America presents Crosstalk, a nationwide call-in program discussing issues that have an effect on our families, our communities, our churches, our nation, and our world. Crosstalk, an opportunity for you to voice your concerns for biblical principles. And now live by satellite and around the world on the internet at vcyamerica.org. Here is today's Crosstalk.
And friends, thank you for joining us on Crosstalk, a very critical issue that we're talking about on today's program. Yesterday morning, the Assistant Attorney General for Civil Rights, Harmeet Dhillon, said that the federal officials discovered tens of thousands of dead people and non-citizens on voting rolls. At present, multiple states are being sued by the Trump administration for failing to turn over voter rolls to the Department of Justice, which is determined to ensure compliance with, like, the National Voter Registration Act and the Help America Vote Act and other laws as well. Out of 60 million records run, they have found at least 350,000 dead people on the voting rolls and approximately 25,000 with no citizenship records. You see, the integrity of elections across this nation are under attack. There are many issues that are going on across the nation as we speak, from ballot harvesting to redistricting battles to ranked choice voting to national popular vote to drop box fraud and so much more. Our guest today has stated that election transparency is the foundation of voter confidence. Americans deserve absolute certainty over only eligible voters of being able to vote, and every lawful vote is counted accurately. Joining us today, we welcome Ken Cuccinelli. He is the national chairman of the Election Transparency Initiative. He previously was the acting director of the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, and then as the acting deputy secretary for the Department of Homeland Security. He was a leading spokesman for the administration on immigration, election security, and homeland security issues. He did serve in state government as well, and for the Virginia Senate from 2002 to 2010, and as Virginia's Attorney General from 2010 to 2014. And Ken Cuccinelli, thank you so much for joining us today on the program.
Yeah, good to be with you.
So there are, I read the words that are coming forth from Harmeet Dhillon just yesterday, and I mean with the limited states that have complied with the Trump administration on voting rolls, to see this many deceased people on the rolls and also many thousands of voting records with no confirmation that they're U.S. citizens, that's pretty alarming.
It is very alarming, though while it may be shocking, it is not surprising to those of us who've worked in this space. You know, that those numbers you rattled off, not counting the 25,000 that they think are not citizens or might not be, is over 1 in every 200 voters on the voter rolls is dead. And those are in the cooperating states.
Right.
So I imagine with non-cooperative states, those numbers are only going to go up, meaning the proportion. And because federal law is pretty explicit about federal government's ability to access those voter rolls, I have little doubt that Harmeet Dhillon is going to succeed in that effort. She's already obviously taken great strides in helping to clean up America's voter rolls. She seems to recognize she still has plenty more to do.
Yeah, and the states that are not cooperating are primarily blue states or very deep blue states, and one can only imagine, as you say, proportionately, those numbers would greatly escalate.
Yes, that's certainly what I expect to see, not just because it's blue states not cooperating, but because they tend to keep policies in place that seem to have a preference for keeping dead people on the voter rolls. And one might reasonably ask, well, why that is. Any invalid name on the voter roll can be used by someone else to vote that person. And, that's the concern. That's why the voter rolls need to be cleaned every so often. And she's just talking about dead people. She didn't even talk about the accuracy of the voter rolls. On average, about 2% of Americans move every month. That's every month. So in a year, that's almost a quarter of Americans that are moving. Well, that takes a lot of work to keep up the voter rolls.
Sure.
I doubt very many people listening to you and me right now, last time they moved, bothered to call the election office where they lived, past tense, to tell them they were leaving. Instead, they just registered to vote at wherever they moved to. And that's pretty common. So how do those voter rolls get cleaned? They need processes that keep up. And unfortunately, government is very bad at that. You know, Amazon's very good at it. The private sector is very good at it.
Right.
But our government is not very good at it. And you combine that with the blue state objections because they want dirty voter rolls. They want a mess. They want to litigate and fight about these things because they have an advantage in litigation. They have a lot more lawyers and a lot more money to fight these things out.
Yeah. Well, one thing she's demonstrated is really all across this country, our voter rolls are in a mess and need the cleaning up. They need purging. They need updating. And you know, that is true on, you know, credit card companies are very sure to make sure that they've got accurate records. And when we think about the integrity of the vote, I mean, this would seem to be a no-brainer that we want to be sure that our records are accurate and that we want every eligible person to have a vote. I mean, this is not to disenfranchise anybody. No,
not at all. It's to make sure that your vote is fairly counted, in fact.
Right.
Rather than discounted by people who shouldn't be voting alongside you, not doing so. So it really is, in my view, or I should say in my observation, Americans very much want clean voter rolls. It's a pretty narrow left-wing minority that does not want clean voter rolls, and you just have to ask yourselves, why is that?
Yeah.
Unfortunately, there's no encouraging answers to that.
We're going to get into some critical election issues going on presently in Virginia and really all across the nation in just a moment, but I'm guessing that your stomach is just churning over what's befallen the state of Virginia since the last election. I mean, this state is not the same.
No, I've lived in Virginia pretty much my whole life, and it's never taken such a radical left turn so fast. We're getting Californicated awfully quickly here. Abigail Spanberger ran under the mask of being a moderate Democrat, and what we're seeing is, let's just say she actually thinks she's a moderate Democrat. Now the rest of the world is seeing what people who call themselves moderate Democrats think a moderate Democrat is, and that it still begins with M, but it's really a lot closer to Marxist. We're getting all sorts of tax increases. We're getting gun-grabbing legislation. I'm preparing to be suing over that. And, of course, after running saying how terrible gerrymandering is, she's enthusiastically supported tomorrow's gerrymandering effort, where they're really just running. It's a referendum for listeners. They're really running it against Trump and just say, oh, it'll just be temporary unfairness just so we can fight Trump. And it was only 5 years ago that Virginians, by a 2-to-1 margin, passed our bipartisan redistricting commission. And if you look at today's maps in Virginia, our congressional maps are extremely fair. We have a 6-5 divided congressional delegation, House delegation. It favors Democrats 6-5. The vote in the last election, the Democrats got about 52%, 53% of the vote, and they have 55% of the congressional seats. It's awfully close to truly fair representation. And having worked to get that bipartisan redistricting, I can tell you that there are metrics for gerrymandering. You can measure maps as more or less gerrymandered, and the map proposed by the Democrats, if they win this referendum tomorrow and survive all the litigation, is, I believe, on an objective basis, the most gerrymandered map in the country. Now, for the non-Virginians listening to you and I today, even if they win tomorrow, they have violated the Virginia Constitution 4 different ways in bringing about this referendum, and one of the 4 is with respect to the map itself. So they still have to win on all 4 of those arguments lawsuits have already been teed up and run, but they're awaiting the outcome of the vote tomorrow. Mm-hmm. So even if the yes vote wins, there are going to be very substantial constitutional challenges to what the Democrats have done here.
You know, I'm looking at an article from the Washington Stand, and the headline caught my attention. It states, quote, Virginia Dems plot to steal 4 House seats in single vote on April 21. There are reports of over $70 million being dumped into Virginia on this issue. And according to the Washington Times, this redistrict fight is on a knife's edge. Is it really that close? Is that what they're talking about, is losing? You're stealing 4 House seats in this single vote tomorrow?
So the expectation is that the map the Democrats have in mind would go from 6-5 Democrat to 10-1 Democrat.
Wow.
And so that's the 4 seats. And the polling, if polling were to be believed, I think that the no vote might prevail. I think there may be sort of a socially conditioned poll response going on, much like people saw when President Trump ran for the first time in 2016. There was this sense that it was socially inappropriate to say you were voting for Donald Trump. So a bunch of people who were voting for Donald Trump didn't admit it to pollsters. And so when he won, they were all shocked. And I'm a little concerned in the other direction here that everybody knows that it's socially unacceptable to so egregiously redistrict Virginia. So I'm concerned that a lot of yes voters aren't admitting that to pollsters. So the polls, again, would suggest that the no vote is going to win, but I have my social concerns with the accuracy of those polls. Though I will say your comment on the money.
Yeah, over $70 million.
Spent,
yeah.
Yes, well, and the ratio, they're probably outspending the no side 8-1.
Wow.
10-1, in that range. And it's a huge imbalance. And all of us in Virginia are YouTube political ads and TV, if you watch TV, have just been flooded, really, since late February with their money and their ads, including President Obama trying to tell us how fair all of this is, 10-1 is. And there hasn't been much in the way of spending in the other direction, at least not relatively speaking.
Is this a lot of outside money coming in from other states?
Oh, yes. Oh, yeah. It's overwhelmingly, like 90% of it is from outside Virginia.
Wow.
Overwhelmingly, yes.
And
because this has nothing to do with Virginia. If this is a Virginia decision about what's fair in Virginia, this would be a blowout. But again, Virginia is being used to try and grab 4 more House seats with an anti-Trump effort driving that. And, we'll see if it works on the voting front. But as I said, I'm very confident that even if they won the yes vote, that they're going to have a very serious problem prevailing on the constitutional arguments under the Virginia Constitution.
Ken Cuccinelli with us here today on Crosstalk, National Chairman of the Election Transparency Initiative. He mentioned former President Obama weighing in on this issue. After the break, friends, I want to air for you a clip that former President Obama is saying and airing in Virginia. We'll be right back.
Back to Genesis with Dr. John Morris, scientist with the Institute for Creation Research. Dr. Morris, whatever happened to Halley's Comet?
Chris, Halley's Comet is what astronomers refer to as a short-term comet. It makes an orbit around the sun every 76 years. People saw it in the early 1900s and then again in the 80s. Astronomers can keep track of it through telescopes, and they've noticed it has decreased in size. Every trip around the sun causes the comet to disintegrate, with the tail of the comet being stripped away. Halley's Comet can't make very many trips around the sun without being totally destroyed. Thus, it couldn't be millions and millions of years old. It's a short-period comet. But there are a lot of short-period comets in the solar system. The solar system can't be billions of years old with all these youthful features in it. Chris, everything fits the recent creation idea that we're taught when we go back to Genesis.
For more information, you can find us on the web at www.icr.org.
You're listening to Crosstalk on the VCY American Network. With us today, Ken Cuccinelli, National Chairman of the Election Transparency Initiative. Their website, electiontransparency.org, electiontransparency.org. A lot of information there. We're going to be covering a number of election integrity issues on the program today, but right now, eyes of the nation are really on the state of Virginia in this vote coming up tomorrow and the matter of redistricting. As our guest mentioned, former President Obama has weighed in on this matter, and I'd like to play a message that he is delivering to Virginians. And he had much to say here in a short period of time. Let's play the clip, and then we're going to have our guest comment on it. Here's former President Obama.
Hey, Virginia. Early voting is underway, and Virginians are turning out in record numbers to vote yes. By voting yes, you have a chance to do something important. Not just for the Commonwealth, but for our entire country. By voting yes, you can push back against the Republicans trying to give themselves an unfair advantage in the midterms. By voting yes, you can take a temporary step to level the playing field. And we're counting on you. Early voting is happening right now. Election Day is on April 21st. So go to iwillvote.com/VA to find your closest polling location.
Okay, so here we have...
plan, show up, and vote yes, Virginia.
Okay, so here he is. He made this statement. We've got to give pushback. This is against, Republicans giving themselves an unfair advantage in the midterms. Really? Your comments?
Yeah, I mean, again, they really think, including Obama, they clearly think that people are just too dumb to look through this. And I would say the people voting for it are voting brazenly and nakedly, partisanly, and they know it. So it is what it is, and they're obviously willing to do that. But the continual chatter by people like President Obama to keep mouthing the word fairness when clearly that's not what's going on here. This is a rather naked, brazen political power grab. So just call it that and invite your team to come help you do it. Mm-hmm. But he can't bring himself to be honest about that.
Yeah, he also used the words to level the playing field. And to me, I looked at right now, the playing field looks pretty level. It's 6-5 right now in favor of Democrats in Virginia. And he wants to put it, in essence, at 10-1. I mean, that's not leveling the playing field.
No, it is not leveling the playing field. It's tipping it to a near cliff. 10-1 in a 52-48 state is pretty extraordinarily unfair. Mm-hmm. So, but that's the way they play here. And we've seen it from Eric Holder, who's even more grotesque in his language. But President Obama has been very prominent. The ad you're playing, just so our listeners know, this is not the first time he's shown up here. His ads have been running in this state for over a month.
Wow. And it's not only is this redistricting an issue, but Virginia's Governor Abigail Spanberger also just signed into law a measure that joins Virginia to the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact. Comment on that if you would as well.
Yeah, so this is an effort by liberals to undermine the Electoral College. And they don't like the Electoral College because it reinforces the sovereignty of the states. Same reason they successfully propose direct election of senators. That may seem like a funny thing to listeners, but 100 years ago, that amendment was added to the U.S. Constitution, and by taking that power away from state legislatures, you got runaway budgets, you got lack of accountability of Washington to you and me, and to the states. And it really, these sort of progressive efforts begin with what they were honest about in, say, the Woodrow Wilson, Teddy Roosevelt era. Progressives then were honest that they didn't like the Declaration of Independence. They didn't like the U.S. Constitution. They wanted people to go to public education and come out as cogs in a wheel. They didn't want them to think. They wanted them to just do what they were told. And this is part of that ongoing effort to get to undermine the founding principles. The national popular vote in Virginia, the bill says the same thing it does in the other states, and that is that once enough states that equal more than 270 electoral votes, which is what someone needs to win the presidency, have passed this pact, this legislation, then no matter who wins in their state, they will award the electoral votes to the winner of the national popular vote. And so really what you do is you shift a lot of power, not all of it, but a lot of it, from small states to great big blue states, which is exactly what they want.
Right, right. And I see right now as to the member states of national popular vote, the reports I've seen is they are now 222 of the electoral votes of the 270 needed.
Yes, that sounds just about right. So, another 38 electoral votes, that's 3 big states or 5 relatively small ones. They're getting pretty close to that. Now, just as we talked about the Virginia redistricting referendum, if this were to ever reach that point, it would also be immediately litigated because it's not a compact that has received congressional approval, which is what the compacts clause of the U.S. Constitution says is supposed to happen. They would all just do it as a function of their state laws, relying on the provision of the federal Constitution that says that state legislatures get to allocate electoral votes. But I think some people who thought they won in their state might have one person, one vote objections within their own state to that kind of a process. So we'll see if they ever get there. This is not a good development for the United States of America. There's a middle way that Nebraska and Maine use. They have 5 and 4 electoral votes respectively, but they award their electoral votes by congressional district. So in the last election, Joe Biden won 1 Nebraska congressional district, Harris won 1 congressional district in Nebraska, and Donald Trump won 2 of them. So he got 2 of the congressional electoral votes. Harris got 1. And because he won the popular vote within the state, Donald Trump got the 2 state-level electoral votes. So he got 4 electoral votes out of Nebraska. Harris got 1. And Maine operates very similarly. But this isn't giving away their power as Nebraskans or Mainites. I don't know what people in Maine call themselves, Mainese, but what that's close to mayonnaise. But they've taken advantage of that provision of how to award electoral votes. But it isn't contra to how anybody votes within their state. If you win in your congressional district, your candidate gets that electoral vote. It isn't the opposite, which is what the national popular vote has the potential danger of doing. So
how significant is, what's happening in Virginia right now? How significant is this to the rest of the nation?
Well, I think it's very significant. If for no other reason than it shows the brazen power over principle approach of the radical left. And, the analogy is to Abigail Spanberger herself. When she's running for office, she is this mild-mannered, middle-of-the-road, quote, moderate Democrat, unquote. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm here to tell you they don't exist anymore. I served with moderate Democrats. My mentor in the General Assembly was a moderate Democrat, not a Republican. I had a Democrat mentor. That's nearly impossible to conceive of today. And they've just been purged from the party, or some of them have just tacked to the left. They just conform themselves to whatever they believe they need to be to survive within their party, rather than standing up for what they used to believe in. And I really believe that the average Virginian, the average American voting Democrat has no idea just how radical the people they're electing these days are.
Ken Cuccinelli is our guest here today on Crosstalk. Again, the website electiontransparency.org. We're going to look at some solutions here into our next segment, but there's an interesting story that just popped up last week in Utah, and it's being reported that a Utah Supreme Court justice by the name of Diana Hagan facing now an investigation by state leaders after it was revealed that she reportedly had a romantic relationship going on with the lawyer to help Democrats redraw their state's congressional maps, which they say was stealing a seat from Republicans. I mean, this redistricting battle going all on, but talk about a conflict of interest here.
Yeah, well, this isn't the first time we've seen this, right? You remember Fannie Willis in Georgia, who was desperately trying to come up with a way to prosecute President Trump and all of the allies who helped him with his campaign there in Georgia. And she was sleeping with the special prosecutor in Georgia. Now here we have a Supreme Court justice, a state Supreme Court justice of all people, reportedly, I obviously have no personal knowledge of this, reportedly with a romantic relationship with a lawyer in a critically important case, in a situation where if it had been known, if the relationship had been known at the time of the case, recusal would have been absolutely demanded by the other side and would have possibly been forced by her fellow justices. So, that it really sullies, pun intended, the entire outcome of that case, which was already so badly decided, but now maybe we know why.
Yeah, wow. Some will come back, though, and say, well, red states are just as guilty. How do you respond to that?
Name an example of that in a red state. I mean, election cheating, for instance, is as old as humanity. So people do things badly from all stripes of the partisan world. Nonetheless, when you look at who wants to require enforcement mechanisms to make sure only U.S. citizens are voting, it's on the right. When you look at who wants to require voter identification to secure our elections, it's on the right. And by the way, even CNN, that radical right-wing network, right, even their own polling shows over 70% of Democrats, 70% plus of Democrats want things like voter ID and citizenship enforcement, which are really the two items you find in the SAVE Act, the federal election legislation that Chip Roy in the House and now Mike Lee in the Senate have been championing, and that's been getting a hearing in the Senate, but they're not pushing it through. And frankly, I just don't think Republican senators are pushing hard enough. This is one of those things that's so popular. It's popular everywhere the joke goes except in the U.S. Senate.
Yeah.
But if they debate it out loud, those senators are going to have a hard time defending their no vote.
Friends, we'll be back in 1 minute. We're talking with Ken Cuccinelli here today on Crosstalk from the Election Transparency Initiative, and we'll get more into the SAVE Act after the break and a couple other matters, too, like ballot harvesting and ranked choice voting. We'll be back in 1 minute. This is Crosstalk on VCY America.
Are you discouraged? Have you given up hope? In such times, it's so important to go to the Scriptures. Remember the story of Zechariah and Elizabeth? How God remembered them and kept His promises? Best-selling author Robert Morgan has taken a deep dive into Scripture around the birth of the Messiah to help us discover the glorious, victorious life that awaits us in Christ. In his book, God Hasn't Forgotten You, Robert provides 24 God lessons that will impact your life, helping you understand that God is at work both in and through you. God works grace into our grief, even turning misery into ministry. The hardcover book, God Hasn't Forgotten You, is available for a donation of $17 or more when you call VCY. 1-800-729-9829.
Election integrity matters. Our topic today on Crosstalk. Ken Cuccinelli is our guest, national chairman of the Election Transparency Initiative. Their website, electiontransparency.org. So many issues going on right now, from redistricting battles, but another battle that's been happening in a number of locations is that of ranked choice voting. And if I could have you comment on this as well, because there are many who just don't understand this. And in other states where they have this, it seems like candidates are being elected who were never intended by the people there. So describe what happens in this process and the concern it raises, that of ranked choice voting.
Well, confusion is one of the big problems with ranked choice voting. Is we all know how to vote. You go to your polling place, you get a ballot, you write in, or you fill in the oval next to the name of the person you want elected, and you drop it in the box, so to speak, or the tabulator. And that isn't how ranked choice voting works. You go show up, and there's a list of all the candidates running, and you rank them. This is my first choice, typically in different columns, by the way. This is my second choice, third, fourth, fifth. Depends how many. The rules are different everywhere. Could be that you rank them all. Could be that you rank a certain number. But most people show up having never heard of this, being quite confused by it, and what you end up with is a lot of spoiled ballots. And by the way, this is not just a right versus left thing. I mean, NAACP leaders from different parts of the country, Oakland, New York, other places, agree with me that this is unfairly confusing to voters and shouldn't be used. And I would also add that it confuses election officials. When New York City famously used it a few years back for a primary, it took them almost a month to count the votes.
Wow.
Because they had to tally and retally the votes. And then they made mistakes along the way. And so as the Election Transparency Initiative, that's our name, we want to see a transparent election system. Ranked choice voting is anything but transparent. It is very difficult to follow, very confusing, and one result is that even if you do everything right on the election officer side, it undermines confidence in the outcome of the election. And that is a tragedy that we want to reverse. That's been a common theme in recent years. And we believe in the KISS principle, keep it simple, stupid. The simpler and more transparent it is, the better. We believe you should be able to see every single thing in your election system except how your neighbor marks their ballot. You should be able to see the computer code on any computer used. So we believe in open source coding for election machines so that you can duplicate what they do back at your own house. Again, so that no matter who wins and who loses, everybody can understand that the election was run fairly, openly, that every legitimate vote was counted, and that illegitimate votes were kept out. That's what things like voter ID and citizenship enforcement are for.
Let's just look at Texas for a moment. They have a ban on ballot harvesting, and that was just recently upheld by a federal court. Comment on this area of ballot harvesting and any concerns with it.
So ballot harvesting is a very dangerous practice. It's legal in Virginia. It's legal in Nevada. It was illegalized in Texas, where they just had court action completed on it. And to give you an idea, Texas illegalized it back in 2021, and the litigation over it didn't end until February of this year. So it took almost 5 years. And what ballot harvesting is that you could be a union member working for a particular candidate, and you could go drive around in your car to various people's houses and pick up their ballots and deliver them to the polls. That's called harvesting ballots. Well, if you do that, let's stay with our union example. It's not that unions aren't known to put pressure on people, and what's to keep them from standing next to you at your kitchen table while you fill out the ballot, quote, correctly, unquote. It's a real invitation to coercion and fraud, and Of course, the other side sells it all the time by saying, well, old people have trouble getting to the polls, but that's what mail is for. That's where mail voting is appropriate. Mm-hmm. And I assume all other states have what Virginia has for disabled people. We have curbside voting, where you literally just pull up. You don't even have to get out of your car, and they'll bring a portable voting mechanism to you. You show your ID, hopefully that's required, and prove who you are. But you're still doing it yourself. You're doing it in person. Accommodations are made, and we all want to make accommodations to people who need them. But ballot harvesting is an invitation to fraud and coercion on a massive scale. When you combine that in a state like Nevada, where they mail out a ballot to every name on the voter rolls, even if they have 20 different names at the same address, which is impossible, and yet they just keep on mailing them. Mm-hmm. Well, the ballot harvester can see that and come and suggest that whoever lives there fill out the ballots, and he'll happily take them in. Well, what do you think is going to happen there? You're going to have big, big problems. You're going to have massive fraud. And that's what ballot harvesting allows. It is an invitation to fraud.
There is a matter that was heard recently before the U.S. Supreme Court on Election Day means Election Day. And there's a number of states that we've got early voting happening for multiple weeks, even before Election Day comes around. Do you have a gut feeling as to which way the court's going to go on this issue?
I'm not completely sure. I know that there are, just judging by oral argument, which can be dicey, there are certainly some votes to end the election on Election Day. Mm-hmm. And that's consistent with almost 30-year-old Supreme Court law in the Foster v. Love case in 1997, where Louisiana would have their first round of their voting in early October, but if you got over 50%, the election was over. And the Supreme Court said, no, you can't consummate the Election Day until the first Tuesday after the first Monday, which is what's in federal law. And the reason that law was put in place back in the 1800s is because different states were having elections at different times, and the outcomes of various elections would affect the later elections. Look, when our founders looked to pass the Constitution, New York intentionally scheduled its constitutional convention a month and a half after Virginia's because they wanted to see what was going to happen in Virginia. And so there was strong support. Justice Alito, for instance, rather obviously thinks that the Election Day definition in statute means they end that day, meaning you can't get more ballots in after that day. But whether there'll be 5 votes for that, I'm not real sure. That comes out of the Fifth Circuit, just like the recent ballot harvesting ruling you and I were just talking about.
Right.
So, but we'll find out here. It's April 20th. We'll find out in the next 2 months.
Right. Yeah, by the end of June, the end of the term here.
Yes.
Friends, if you'd like to start getting on board with your questions today or brief comments, our number to Crosstalk, 800-733-9829. That's 1-800-733-9829. And so as to a solution, Mr. Cuccinelli, you've been promoting the SAVE Act. What are some of the highlights of the SAVE Act that are important for election integrity?
So the SAVE Act does 2 things. It finally fixes the mess in federal law where you're required to be a citizen to vote in U.S. elections. However, so that's already in law. However, there's no way for states to enforce it because other federal laws and rulings by federal courts have messed it up so badly. So this is a situation where Washington screwed it up. Only Washington can fix it. Overwhelmingly agree that only U.S. citizens should be voting in U.S. elections. Again, that's the law today, but there's no way to enforce it. So the SAVE Act finally allows a way for states to enforce this, and it requires proof of citizenship for people who are new voter registrants, So it's a going forward requirement. And the second element of the SAVE Act requires a photo identification to vote, which 2/3 of states require now, but this would impose a national standard with very limited exceptions for, like, Inuits up in the Arctic Circle who have no documents at all. There are provisions for things like that, but Lisa Murkowski uses that as an excuse in Alaska to oppose it, and yet the accommodations are made. My suggestion might be that maybe don't make the accommodations unless Lisa Murkowski wants to vote for it. But I joke that those two requirements, photo identification for voters, which so many Americans support. Again, over 70% of Democrats, according to CNN, support this. This is overwhelmingly popular. This is close to a unified position of the American people as you can get, and yet it's struggling in the Senate because Democrats are using the filibuster to block it, and the filibuster requires 60 votes to pass legislation.
Is there an end around this possible at all? And some have talked about adding this to as part of the reconciliation package. It would only need 51 votes. Is that a path forward, or is it 60 or nothing? And I know President Trump's called about abolishing the filibuster. That's a great controversy across the nation right now as well. But any way to get past that 60 vote threshold?
So getting rid of the filibuster gets rid of the 60 vote threshold. And Mike Lee and Senator Rick Scott of Florida and others have called for doing just that in the absence of being able to pass this. And you've also heard people talk about reconciliation. Don't fall for that. Reconciliation is for budget matters. This is not a monetary issue. So when I hear senators like Senator Kennedy, who I really enjoy watching in the public arena from Louisiana, talk about using reconciliation, it makes me very sad because I know that he thinks we're too stupid to figure out that there's no budget aspect to this. That's a cop-out, and we shouldn't let these folks get away with that. They need to get down to the floor of the Senate. They need to argue this through. Frankly, this is how the Civil Rights Act was passed. They didn't get rid of the filibuster. They talked their way through it. It's called the talking filibuster. And it requires the majority party to come down there and advocate for the legislation and make the other side show up. But frankly, these senators just don't want to bother putting in the work.
A talking filibuster. And friends, by the way, our phone lines are open. We're going to take a quick break here. But to reach out to your senators, you can reach them at 202-224-3121. That's 202-224-3121. Our phone number to Crosstalk today is 800-733-9829. Your questions for our guest today, or a brief comment, 800-733-9829. You're listening to Crosstalk on the VCY American Network.
For the Worldview Report, I'm Brandon House. Our website's worldviewtube.com. Would you do me a favor? Would you write down 1 Peter chapter 5, verses 6 through 11? That's 1 Peter chapter 5, verses 6 through 11. Go study those this week. I hope it'll encourage you. You know, the Bible actually says there that when you have promotion, it comes from the Lord. But we have to humble ourselves under his mighty hand, and he'll exalt us at the right time. But you know what? Sometimes there's preparation. Sometimes it says we have to suffer a while, and then we're perfected and established and strengthened. You should go look up what those words mean in the original text. They mean repair or adjusted. Sometimes we have to have our attitude adjusted, our focus, convictions adjusted or repaired. You know, the text also uses words that imply steadfast, resolute, in a certain direction. It also means spiritually prepared with knowledge. Understand this. Oftentimes, persecution comes before promotion.
listening to Crosstalk on VCY America. Ken Cuccinelli with us here today. He is he served in the state government in Virginia Senate for 8 years, and then was Virginia's Attorney General for 4 years, 2010 to 2014, now chairman of the Election Transparency Initiative, their website, electiontransparency.org. And just going into before the break, you had mentioned about this talking filibuster. Wasn't that the way this was established to begin with, a talking filibuster?
Well, what was established originally?
Wasn't the founders and the writings that established the filibuster, was it not a talking filibuster that was put in mind, not just a casual vote? No, you don't have 60 votes?
So, of course, at the outset, senators represented states. They weren't popularly elected, so you had a whole different dynamic.
Okay.
They answered to their legislatures rather directly, because if they didn't get reelected. And the filibuster itself arose in the 1840s, so it's almost 200 years old. So it doesn't date from the founding era, but it certainly long predates the popular election of senators.
Mm-hmm.
And as you and I were talking on the break, if you want to see an R movie, if you want to get on a plane or a train or drive an automobile or pick up Sudafed, you have to show an ID.
Mm-hmm.
And voting strikes me as a lot more important than all of those things. And yet, in a good chunk of this country, you don't have to show a photo identification to prove that you are the person whose name is on the voter roll. And nowhere do you have to prove in any enforceable way that you're a U.S. citizen in order to vote. And those are the two things the SAVE Act does that we want people to call their U.S. senators, whether they're Republicans or Democrats. Republicans talk tough, but they sort of squish behind the scenes, and oftentimes. And then the Democrats are universally opposed right now. But this is such a popular item that if they hear from enough of their constituents, particularly in an election year, I think a lot of them will change course.
You had to have a photo ID to shovel snow in New York City.
Yeah. Yes, under Mom Donnie, that's right, to even shovel snow when they needed you.
Yeah.
But not to vote.
Yeah.
Not to vote.
And friends,
unbelievable.
Again, you can reach out to your U.S. senators at 202-224-3121. And again, regardless if there's an R or D behind their name, they need to really come to the plate and cast a vote once way or the other. Let the American people see where they stand on this issue, 202-224-3121. But we're seeing so much of those who are just, whatever leadership says, that's, we just want to be like the Pied Piper and follow after them. And when did we lose this representation of the people, by the people, and for the people?
Yeah, and the filibuster has a lot to do with that, I think. We saw a few years ago when Joe Biden became president and the Democrats had the House and the Senate, it was a very close call that they were running an election takeover. H.R. 1 and H.R. 4 were the numbers of the bills that would have really centralized voting systems in Washington, D.C., that it was a complete takeover. It was an enormous bill that would have mandated the dumping of all adults. Note they didn't say citizens, adults from state databases onto the voter rolls. That would have captured literally millions of illegal aliens. And they would have decriminalized non-citizens voting whose names were dumped on the voter rolls this way. So they basically legalized voting by illegal aliens. So when you hear people say, oh, those right-wingers are crazy, nobody wants non-citizens to vote, the Democrats put it in a bill that they were virtually all the co-sponsors of, including Abigail Spanberger, now my governor here in Virginia, from 2021. And so it was real. It was in the bill. We could point you to the sections. And by the narrowest of margins, partly because of the leadership of the Election Transparency Initiative, we avoided that calamity. We also would be remiss if we didn't give some credit to Joe Manchin, Democrat senator, and Kristen Sinema, who left the Democrats and became an independent as a senator from Arizona, who stood against getting rid of the filibuster. That's how they were trying to do that election takeover there, is to get rid of the filibuster to do an election takeover instead of getting rid of the filibuster to secure elections and leave them in the hands of the states, which is what the SAVE Act seeks to do.
Merle is calling from Tennessee. Merle, you're on the air.
Yeah, Jim, several quick things. A voter integrity group discovered that in New York State, they are registering voters by the millions without ID. They said it's over 3 million they found had no voter ID when they got registered. Also, it's a sad day when a party cannot win an election on merit and they have to cheat. That is a sad day. Thirdly, I just want to end with this. Barack Hussein Obama is back at it again, and he's projecting, they're coming out by the, overwhelmingly saying yes. That's all projecting, trying to get people to move in a certain direction because they want to be where everybody else is going. But I know the American people are smarter and all that, but I just wanted to say, up in New York, they discovered over 3 million without IDs were registered to vote.
Merle, thank you for the call. Mr. Cuccinelli, we have just a minute left. Your comment to Merle and what you'd like to leave with our listeners today.
Well, the SAVE Act fixes the very kind of problem that Merle is talking about people registering without identification. Now to register, you'd have to prove you're a citizen in the same way you do with a real ID. So it's not like this is new under federal legislation. They even do it with the real ID. And, this is a concern that goes back 20 years. Recently released Myers Report, which people can see on the news section of electiontransparency.org. You can see that in one of our recent items in the news section there. They point out that the Carter-Baker Commission of 2005 identified this problem. This is not a new problem. And the opponents who say we have a solution in search of a problem, Jimmy Carter identified this as a problem. Speaking of not a raging right-winger. Good man, not the best president, but he was certainly right about concerns in the election system that found their way into that Carter-Baker Commission, and the SAVE Act goes a long way to meeting the concerns that Merle just raised.
And we're going to have to leave it there today. electiontransparency.org. Thank you for joining us on the broadcast.
Glad to be with you.
You've been listening to Crosstalk via satellite and the internet from VCY America. Views expressed may or may not be those of this station. For a CD of today's program, send a donation of $6 or more to VCY Tape Ministry, 3434 West Kilbourne Avenue, Milwaukee, Wisconsin, 53208, or download by RSS or podcast from crosstalkamerica.com. And join us again for Crosstalk.